Along the rocky coastline of South Africa's Western Cape Province, beneath the cold Atlantic waters where kelp forests grow dense and clear, there lives a creature that has existed in these waters for millions of years. Haliotis midi, the South African abalone, known locally as pearlmoan, is a large sea snail, a marine gastropod that grazes on kelp fronds and grows slowly to a shell length of up to 25 centimeters over a decade or more of careful feeding. It is also one of the most trafficked wildlife products in the world, the centerpiece of a black market worth hundreds of millions of dollars annually, and the commodity around which one of the most violent and complex criminal ecosystems in southern Africa has organized itself. The story of the abalone poaching crisis in South Africa involves Chinese organized crime networks, local Cape Flats gangs, methamphetamine flooding into impoverished communities, corrupt law enforcement, a fishing industry in collapse, and an ecological system being hollowed out faster than any natural process could regenerate it. It is a story about what happens when a high-value natural resource, a desperate labor pool, and sophisticated international criminal demand converge in a regulatory environment that has never been adequate to the challenge. Abalone has been prized in Chinese culinary and medicinal tradition for centuries. Dried abalone, reconstituted and served in high-end Cantonese cuisine, commands extraordinary prices. Premium dried product from wild abalone can sell for thousands of dollars per kilogram in Hong Kong and mainland China. The cultural and status significance of abalone in this context is comparable to the significance of shark fin soup or certain grades of pu'er tea. It is a product consumed at significant occasions, given as a high-value gift, and associated with prosperity and good fortune. South African abalone, Haliotis midi, is among the most sought-after species in this market. Its flavor profile and texture are highly regarded by the buyers who matter in the high-end dried seafood markets of Hong Kong, Guangzhou, and other major Chinese cities. South Africa's legal abalone quota, the amount that licensed commercial harvesters are permitted to take annually, has been set at levels intended to be sustainable given the species' slow growth rate. At various points, the quota has been cut, suspended, and restructured in response to stock collapse. The legal market cannot supply the demand that exists. The illegal market fills the gap. The operational structure of the abalone poaching network as it exists in South Africa's Western Cape involves several distinct layers, each with its own economic logic and its own relationship to violence. At the base are the diverse men from the impoverished communities of the Cape Flats, the predominantly colored townships that ring Cape Town, who enter the water in wetsuits to harvest abalone from the rocky reefs along the coastline. These divers work in conditions that are dangerous by any measure: cold water, strong currents, great white sharks, and the constant risk of arrest by marine enforcement officers. They are paid cash for each kilogram delivered, rates that are, by the standards of the formal economy in these communities, attractive, though a fraction of the ultimate value of the product they harvest. Above the divers are the mid-level operators who collect the harvested abalone, arrange for its initial processing, typically drying or canning, and manage the transport networks that move product from the coast toward export points. These operators have relationships with both the diver networks and the upper-level export infrastructure. They are typically local criminal enterprises, often associated with the gang networks that control street-level crime and drug distribution in the Cape Flats townships. At the top of the network are the export-level operators, primarily Chinese criminal networks, often described by South African law enforcement as connected to triads, operating out of Hong Kong, Taiwan, and mainland China, who manage the movement of product from South Africa to the destination markets in Asia. This layer controls the financial flows and the international logistics of the trade. The currency exchange at the center of this trade is what makes it particularly damaging to the communities it involves. South African abalone is, in a significant and documented proportion of transactions, not exchanged for cash. It is exchanged for methamphetamine. The tick trade, tick being the South African term for crystal methamphetamine, and the abalone trade have become structurally intertwined in the Western Cape over the past 2 decades. Chinese criminal networks, which have established supply chains for methamphetamine precursor chemicals through networks that reach from Asian manufacturing sources into Africa, offer drugs as payment for abalone. The divers and mid-level operators who provide abalone receive tick, which they consume and distribute within their communities. This barter arrangement has several advantages for the criminal networks orchestrating it. It reduces the cash exposure of the transactions. Cash is traceable, and large cash movements attract regulatory attention. It creates a captive customer base. Divers who are paid and tick-develop dependency that ensures continued participation in the poaching operation regardless of changing market conditions. And it connects two criminal trades that reinforce each other, creating a mutually sustaining criminal ecosystem that is considerably more resilient than either trade would be independently. The consequences for the Cape Flats communities are severe and well documented. Methamphetamine addiction has become a significant public health crisis in these communities, contributing to family breakdown, elevated violence, and the capture of young men into criminal networks from which escape is difficult. The pathway from diver to addict to arrested criminal is tragically common. The ecological consequences for the abalone population have been catastrophic. South African abalone stocks have declined by approximately 90% over the past 3 decades. The legal commercial fishery has been closed in significant portions of the range. Stock assessments indicate that the population in the most heavily poached areas has collapsed to levels where natural recovery, even in the complete absence of further harvesting, would take decades. Marine protected areas have been established along portions of the coast, providing some degree of protection. But marine protected areas with limited enforcement resources, in a context where the economic incentive for poachers is large and the penalty risk is manageable, provide only partial protection. Poaching within declared marine protected areas is well documented. The South African government has increased penalties for abalone poaching, designated it as an organized crime offense, and established specialized enforcement units targeting the trade. The enforcement effort is real and has resulted in significant seizures. It is also, by the honest assessment of law enforcement officials who work this problem, insufficient to reverse the trajectory of the illegal trade. The abalone crisis is, in its structural elements, a version of a problem that recurs across natural resource management globally. A high-value resource, a population with economic incentives to harvest it illegally, criminal networks with the sophistication to manage the international trade, and an enforcement and regulatory system that is structurally under-resourced relative to the value at stake. What makes the South African situation additionally distinctive is the explicit drug-for-abalone exchange that has embedded the poaching trade within the social fabric of the communities that provide its labor. The abalone network does not simply pay the Cape Flats communities for their participation. It pays them in a currency designed to create permanent dependency. It is a supply chain that, by design, generates its own workforce. The purloin on the reef grows slowly. It has been growing in these waters for millennia. At current rates of removal, the question is no longer whether the population will recover to historical levels in the near term. It is whether enough breeding animals will survive to sustain the species in South African waters at any commercially or ecologically meaningful level. The cold Atlantic water along the Cape coastline still holds kelp forests. The abalone that graze them are increasingly rare. The market in Hong Kong still pays a premium for the ones that get through.